one of the albums I worked on that really became a cult album. It was really an interesting project. There was a guy named Gene Clark, and Gene Clark was the singer in the Byrds. He was in different combinations, like with Chris Hillman and Richie Furay and all these guys. But he was a great singer songwriter. Uh, but eventually he left the Byrds and he got a deal, and he we went in the studio to do an album called No Other, and it wasn't successful commercially, but over the years it's become incredibly underground successful. And I remember when we cut the title track for that, No Other, I think I have five basses on that track. I did subharmonic bass, uh, played the melodic stuff on the track, fuzz bass, all kinds of stuff. They just kind of said, "Go for it," and I just sat there coming up with all kinds of ideas. So that was one of those unusual moments when uh, there's been a few times where artists have said, "Just orchestrate it with the bass. Let's do that." Phil did that for on one of his tracks on No Jacket Required too. But my real memory of that project, we cut it at Village Recorders here in Los Angeles, and Joe Cocker was in the next studio working on an album, and we're in there, and I loved No Other, but it was a very hard record to make because things weren't formulated. So we were working over and over on tracks and really flogging really hard on this thing. The end result was great, but it was a hard album to make. And one of the tracks we were cutting, and it's one of those things, when it's the right one. Everybody's playing, but they're kind of looking at each other, kind of going, yes, it's like the third day of it or something like that. And while we were recording, Cocker came in from the next studio and into the control room, and he'd been imbibing. He'd had something to drink, I believe, and he's sitting behind the desk and getting into it, from what the engineers told me. And we're playing out there, and we're in the moment. And all of a sudden, he's so into it that he reaches down, hits the talkback button, and lets out one of those infamous Joe Cocker screams right into the microphone. Blew all our headphones off our heads. It was so loud. Gene Gene was a big, tough dude. Gene knocked over the vocal booth to
Wow.
get in and get Joe because he was going to kill him. And Joe's people are dragging him down the hall to lock him back in his studio again. And we listened back to the tape because we're recording on tape still at that time. And you're listening, and it's as though somebody took a razor blade and cut the tape. That's how quickly everybody stopped. And we had to call the session. Everybody's ears were ringing and we couldn't hear anymore. But I'll never forget that moment. And then watching Gene come out of that vocal booth to kill Cocker. And then I had the great fortune of working with Cocker later after he was all clean and everything. And it was because he was always one of my favorite artists. So it was really great to do a great album with the guy and hang out with him in the studio.
As you said, it's become a cult favorite, hasn't it? Because when it was released, it went down really negatively. Let's be honest with the critics, and I think
Yeah,
the label pretty much refused to promote it. It cost a lot of money. It
yeah.
lost a lot of money, but it did come back, as you said, a few years later, and it got re-released. And how did you feel at the time, though, when you put so much energy into it, and as you said, it was a difficult album to make, for it to just kind of flop the way it did?
I promise you, there are so many albums I've worked on that had the same fate. I mean, it's interesting. You'll go in the studio and you'll cut something and you'll go, "This sucks. This is just horrible." Next thing you know, it's a number one record and it's on the air all the time. And you'll go in and cut something else that you think is the best thing you ever worked on, and it doesn't even get released. Um,
Wow.
so when you're talking music and music business, there's a chasm between the two. So I don't take any of that kind of stuff personally. I was really proud of No Other, and I think it's a great record, and it really shows Gene at his best. But for the fact that the label, because sometimes you'll work on a project for a label that the label is so excited that you're doing, and just before the album gets finished and released, there's a change of administration at the label, and the new people that come in don't want anything to do with all the stuff they've been doing. They want their, fingerprint on it, and they'll can the record at that point or not promote it. And you'll just sit there and you go, it's sad, but it's great that through, especially now through so many different platforms like YouTube and all that, stuff can be rediscovered and ends up taking on a whole new life. And no other's been one of those things that if you were looking at the old famous tortoise and the hare race, well, it's the tortoise. Some people have a thing that goes boom, it's great, and bam, it's gone. Other things just sit there and they just cruise along decade after decade. And, there's something great about that, because that having that longevity allows other generations to discover things. To me, one of the most thrilling things is when I end up talking like friends of mine's kids or grandchildren, and they start talking, oh God, Hendrix, man. You're going, wow, this is a trip.
Yeah.
So it's pretty great. But I don't judge things by their commercial success, because that's out of my hands completely. All I can do is go in and try to make the best record we can, and then whatever happens after that, we can't control that.